The studio lights blazed overhead, casting an almost interrogative glow over the sleek modern set. The audience murmured with anticipation, their phones held at the ready, waiting to capture what they hoped would be another viral moment. Sylvester Stallone sat in the center of it all, calm, unshaken, and completely in control. Across from him, Caldwell, the polished, razor-sharp host known for his progressive slant and love for gotcha journalism, leaned forward with a smirk playing on his lips. This was his battlefield, where he had cornered politicians, humiliated actors, and exposed so-called outdated mindsets. Tonight, Stallone was his latest target. Caldwell's voice was smooth, rehearsed, dripping with artificial sincerity. "Mr. Stallone, you've always been a symbol of American toughness. But don't you think that kind of masculinity is outdated? I mean, in today's world, shouldn't strength be redefined to be more inclusive?" A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, subtle nods of agreement from Caldwell's fans, those who had come expecting to see yet another guest stumble under his scrutiny. But Stall? He didn't flinch. Instead, he let the question hang in the air, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough for tension to settle. Then, he exhaled through his nose, slowly, like a fighter measuring his opponent. His voice, deep and deliberate, cut through the room like a blade. "You mean, do I think being tough is a bad thing now?" Caldwell smirked, sensing his moment. "I think toughness can be toxic when it discourages vulnerability," he replied. Stallone chuckled, but there was no amusement in it, just a quiet, knowing certainty. "Let me ask you something, Caldwell," he said, leaning forward. "If someone broke into your house tonight, do you want a tough guy there, or do you want someone who's going to sit down and talk about their feeling?" A gasp rippled through the audience. Caldwell opened his mouth, but Stallone wasn't finished. "See, toughness isn't about punching walls or yelling the loudest. It's about standing your ground when life knocks you down. It's about discipline, respect, protecting your family. And if you think the world doesn't need that anymore," he shook his head, letting his words sink in, "then I don't know what world you're living in." Caldwell forced a chuckle, but his fingers tightened slightly over his cue cards. The energy in the room had shifted. This wasn't going as planned. Stallone had taken the first punch, and Caldwell was already staggering. The moment Stallone's words settled, the atmosphere in the studio changed. It was no longer an easy, controlled interview. It had become a battle. The audience, once nodding along with Caldwell's carefully crafted narrative, now sat on edge, eyes flicking between the two men. Something had shifted. Caldwell, to his credit, didn't back down. Not yet. He straightened his tie, a forced chuckle escaping his lips. "All right, fair enough," he said, shifting in his seat. "But don't you think Hollywood, your movies in particular, have glorified violence as the only way to solve problems?" The question was meant to trap Stallone, to make him stumble, to make him acknowledge some kind of guilt. But Stallone didn't blink. Instead, he smirked. "Hollywood glorifies a lot of things," he said. "You ever seen a movie where a guy saves the world by filling out paperwork?" The audience burst into laughter, real laughter, not the manufactured kind that late-night shows prompt with blinking signs. Even some of Caldwell's own crew members exchanged smirks. Caldwell's jaw tensed. He was losing them. Stallone didn't let up. He leaned forward, voice lower now, more measured, as if explaining something obvious to a man too caught up in ideology to see the truth. "Look, man, I make movies. Movies aren't real. You get that right? I mean, last time I checked, I never actually went 15 rounds with Apollo Creed, never took down an army with a red bandana and a knife, never single-handedly saved the world." A few more chuckles rippled through the crowd. Caldwell's grip on his cue cards tightened. "But you know what is real?" Stallone continued, his tone shifting. "The guy working 2 jobs to put food on the table, the single mom raising 3 kids, the firefighter running into a burning building, the soldier on his 3rd tour overseas. You think they wake up worrying about toxic masculinity?" The studio fell into silence. Caldwell swallowed hard. Stallone shook his head. Strength isn't about hurting people. It's about carrying the weight when no one else will. And if you think the world doesn't need that anymore, well, I'd love to see you explain that to the people keeping you safe while you sit here in a nice suit asking loaded questions. The audience erupted. Cheers, applause, even some standing. Caldwell's confidence flickered, his control slipping through his fingers like sand. And Stallone? He was just getting started. The moment the applause died down, Caldwell knew he had a problem. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had built his career on controlling interviews, leading guests into well-crafted traps, exposing their so-called contradictions. But Stallone wasn't just dodging the traps. He was tearing them apart in front of a live audience. Caldwell cleared his throat, forcing a smile. He needed to shift the narrative, fast. "All right, I hear you," he said, sitting up straighter. "But let's talk about something bigger. America. Right now, we're at a point where people are questioning what it really means to be strong, what it means to be a man. Some would argue that your version of toughness, the old-school, never-show-weakness kind, is part of the problem, that it creates more division than unity. What do you say to that?" He thought he had him, a question loaded with cultural weight, impossible to answer without controversy. But Stallone just exhaled, slowly, deliberately, his eyes locked onto Caldwell's. "You ever meet a firefighter?" Caldwell blinked. "Excuse me?" "A firefighter, a cop, a soldier, a single mom working 2 jobs. You ever talk to those people?" Stallone's voice was calm but carried the weight of experience. Caldwell hesitated. "Well, You think toughness is their problem?" Stallone interrupted, leaning forward. "Their toughness is the only reason the world keeps spinning." The audience erupted. A low whistle from the back, murmurs of agreement. Caldwell clenched his jaw. This was slipping away from him. "The problem isn't strength," Stallone continued, his voice measured. "The problem is people talking about strength like it's dangerous, like it's something to apologize for. Weakness isn't a virtue, pal. Strength with control. That's what keeps people safe." The air was thick with tension. Caldwell was losing the room. He glanced toward his producer, searching for help, but the crew had gone still, watching, waiting. And Stallone, he wasn't finished. "You want to know the real problem?" he said, voice dropping just enough to make the audience lean in. "It's not toughness. It's people who talk about toughness like it's the enemy, while living in a world built and protected by tough people." The silence was deafening. Caldwell had walked into the ring with a heavyweight, and now, with each passing second, he was being knocked out in slow motion. Caldwell felt the sweat creeping down the back of his neck. This was spiraling. He had lost the crowd, he had lost control, and worst of all, he had lost Stallone's respect. The actor sat across from him, arms folded, posture relaxed, like a fighter who knew he had already won. Caldwell forced a chuckle, trying to regain his footing. "All right, I see where you're coming from, but let's be honest. Society is evolving. We don't live in the same world as when you made Rocky. People today are thinking critically about gender roles, about systemic issues. Don't you think it's time to move forward?" He thought he had control of the conversation again. He thought he had cornered Stallone into sounding outdated. But then Stallone tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Thinking critically?" he repeated, voice steady. Then, with a slow smirk, he added, "Or just criticizing." The audience exploded. Cheers, laughter, even the camera crew exchanged glances, their smirks barely concealed. Caldwell clenched his jaw, gripping the cue cards like a lifeline. "Listen," he pressed, voice tighter now. "If toughness is so important, why do so many people push back against it? Why do so many people feel like it's outdated?" Stallone let the question hang, let the tension build. Then he leaned forward, voice low and sharp. "Because weak people don't like being reminded they're weak." Boom. The crowd lost it. Some stood, clapping, others sat frozen, processing the brutal honesty of his words. Caldwell opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Stallone let the reaction ride out, then sat back, exhaling. "Look, man, life is gonna throw punches. It's gonna hit you harder than you ever expect, and when it does, the world ain't gonna care about your feelings. It's gonna ask you one question: can you take the hit and keep moving forward?" Caldwell had nothing, no comeback, no counter-argument, just silence. And outside that studio, as the cameras rolled and the internet waited, a media firestorm was about to ignite. Caldwell barely held his smile as the cameras cut. He had lost, not just the debate, not just control of the room, but something deeper, his credibility. He could feel it slipping through his fingers. Stallone, on the other hand, simply stood up, stretched his shoulders, and gave a small nod to the audience before walking off set. No victory lap, no gloating, just quiet confidence. Backstage, Caldwell ripped out his earpiece. The producer's voice crackled through before the signal cut out. "This is bad. Social media is already on fire. We need to control the narrative." Too late. The damage was done. Someone in the audience had already uploaded the clip. Within minutes it was everywhere, trending, exploding. Stoll Rex host in live interview. Sylvester Stallone just ended woke media. This is why we need real men like Stallone. Caldwell's team scrambled, issuing emergency edits before officially posting the interview. But it didn't matter. The raw, unfiltered truth was already out there. Clips were dissected, analyzed, replayed in slow motion with dramatic music. Reaction videos flooded the internet. In one corner, conservatives cheered. "Finally, someone says it how it is." In another, progressives panicked. Toxic masculinity at its finest. Caldwell's Twitter was a war zone. His network rushed to damage control, releasing a carefully worded statement. "At Network Name, we believe in fostering open discussions. Differing perspectives are crucial to meaningful conversations." No one cared. The internet had already decided who won, and Stallone, he said nothing. No tweets, no interviews, no response. Because he didn't need to. Caldwell sat in his office, his hands clenched into fists as his phone buzzed relentlessly. He had lost control. The interview was supposed to be his moment, a display of intellectual dominance over an aging action star. Instead, it had become his greatest humiliation. His network had hoped the controversy would die down in a day or two, but it only intensified. The clip refused to fade, bouncing from Twitter to Facebook, then to YouTube and TikTok. Memes were everywhere. People took Stallone's best lines and turned them into rallying cries. Weakness isn't a virtue. The world isn't built by soft people. You think toughness is a problem? Then I don't know what world you're living in, man. Caldwell scrolled through his mentions. Brutal. Some comments mocked him. How does it feel to get schooled by Rambo? Dude got knocked out without Stallone throwing a punch. Others were more measured, but just as damning. This isn't just about Caldwell losing an argument. It's about how the media manipulates conversations until someone finally stands up to them. But then a different voice entered the conversation, one that changed everything. Firefighters, police officers, military veterans, single parents, factory workers. They started speaking up. A retired Marine posted a video. "Stallone gets it. Strength isn't about violence, it's about resilience. We need more of that." A single mother from Oklahoma shared, "I raised 3 boys alone. If I wasn't tough, they wouldn't have eaten. Don't tell me strength is a bad thing." A construction worker filmed himself on break. "Media elites don't get it. Real toughness builds this country." And suddenly this wasn't just about Stallone versus Caldwell. It was about something bigger. Had modern society gone soft? Had people forgotten what real strength looked like? Was toughness really the enemy, or was it the thing holding everything together? Caldwell watched as the conversation slipped even further from his control. This wasn't just a viral moment anymore. It was a reckoning. Caldwell had weathered controversies before, but this was different. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong, it was a cultural shift unfolding in real time, and he was on the losing side. His producers tried damage control. The network released carefully worded statements about respecting all perspectives and encouraging open debate, but no one bought it. The internet had already made up its mind. And then the numbers started to drop. Ratings for Caldwell's show plummeted overnight. Advertisers, nervous about the backlash, started pulling out quietly. His name became a running joke in conservative media. Even neutral outlets couldn't ignore the headlines. Did Stallone just expose the media's greatest weakness? Caldwell faces backlash after failed gotcha moment. Meanwhile, Stallone said nothing, no tweets, no statements, no follow-ups. He didn't need to. The interview spoke for itself, and his silence made the contrast even sharper. And then, the final blow came. One evening, while scrolling through his phone, Caldwell saw something that made his stomach drop. His own network had quietly reassigned him. His prime time slot was gone. No public announcement, no farewell episode, just a quiet, humiliating demotion to a lesser time slot. He had become a liability. The realization hit hard. Caldwell had spent his career believing he was shaping narratives, controlling conversations. But now, he was the one being controlled. And outside his studio, the world kept talking, not about him, but about the bigger picture. Had the media lost its grip on reality? Had it spent too long dismissing traditional values, only to be blindsided when the public pushed back? Caldwell had wanted to make an example out of Stallone. Instead, he became the example. Lessons from Stallone's interview: strength, resilience, and reality. Sylvester Stallone's powerful stand against media manipulation teaches us an essential truth. Real strength isn't outdated, it's necessary. Here's how we can apply this wisdom to our daily lives. Strength is not the enemy, it's the foundation. In a world that often criticizes traditional toughness, Stallone reminds us that strength isn't about aggression, it's about resilience. Life will test you. It will knock you down. The question isn't whether challenges will come, but whether you'll stand back up. Strength isn't toxic. It's what builds nations, protects families, and carries burdens when no one else will. Don't let others control the narrative. Caldwell entered that interview believing he controlled the conversation, but the truth is, reality speaks louder than scripted narratives. In our lives, we must be cautious of manipulation, whether from media, social pressures, or personal doubts. Think critically, question motives, stand firm in your beliefs. Respect experience over ideology. Stallone didn't win that debate through arrogance, he won with experience. People who build, protect, and sacrifice understand life in ways theories never will. Instead of dismissing traditional values, we should learn from those who have lived through real struggles. The world respects those who stand their ground. Stallone didn't apologize for his beliefs. He owned them, and in the end his silence spoke louder than any defensive statement. In life, be confident in who you are. Stand firm, not because it's easy, but because the truth is worth defending.